Good evening, and welcome to the public meeting of the Halton District School Board for Wednesday, February the 19th, 2020. At this moment, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is video voice recorded and live streamed from the htsb.ca website. I would also like to ask that you turn any devices to silent mode. All trustees are present, as well as all superintendents. This evening, Trustee Rocha will be honoring the land.
Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis, from the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis. These lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest this evening? Seeing none. Next, we are up to the agenda. Is there any discussion for the agenda this evening? Could I have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Trustee Garrett, seconded by Trustee Amos. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, so the next portion of our agenda is actually delegations. So we're going to need that table, Mr. Fullen. Okay. So our first delegation is Rivka Birkin-Bradley, and this is about the Palermo Boundary Review. So just to give you a little information about our delegation bylaw, and for those that are watching and in the gallery. So a delegation shall be allowed for up to 5 minutes for their presentation to the board. Delegations must provide new information to the Board of Trustees. Following the delegation, the chair will open the floor to trustees for up to 5 minutes for questions of clarification to either the delegate or staff. So I have a timer here for 5 minutes, and I can give you a warning when you have like 1 minute left, okay? So start whenever you're ready.
Excellent. Okay. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. We have 2 children, one in JK and one in daycare in the affected area. I urge you to ensure first that siblings and not just existing students continue to be guaranteed attendance at Heritage Glen for the duration of their elementary education, and second, that busing continue to be provided. I know that other parents share my concerns. If you have not heard from them directly, I believe this is because, based on our experience to date, some have come to believe that our feedback and concerns will not, in any event, affect the outcome in this process. I remain hopeful. I and many parents spent time and effort providing feedback in emails, a petition, the feedback form, and the December 12th information session. We are encouraged to provide ideas and alternatives and assure that the recommendation emailed and discussed at the December 12th meeting was not final. It was therefore incredibly disappointing to read Report 20018 and see, first, that the recommendation was unchanged from what was presented to us on and before December 12th. I'm not sure whether this is because, as I first learned in reading the report, the steering committee was not consulting us but was informing the community. I would have appreciated the transparency and courtesy of hearing that at the outset. Further, I think the report minimizes our opposition to the recommendation and doesn't adequately capture our feedback. For example, the report doesn't mention how aligned parents were in opposing the move to Palermo. It does not mention the petition signed by a majority of families in both the north and south areas and circulated by highly concerned parents who went door to door. Moreover, the report cites only a few concerns raised by parents and doesn't include other significant concerns. Like, for example, it doesn't mention that families like mine purchased homes in the areas with the expectation that all of our children would attend and be bused to Heritage Glen. In our case, we bought our first house in August 2019 under the understanding, based on board representations, such as the school boundary map and phone calls to the board, that our girls would both attend and be bused to Heritage Glen. We calculated that we could carry our mortgage because, based on school start times and eligibility for busing, we would not require to pay for before care. At Palermo, we would require before care if it's even available for us. The report doesn't mention the negative impact to parents' schedules and commutes and child care arrangements. In our case, my husband and I both commute along the QEW, he to Hamilton, and I to Mississauga to arrive at work by 8:15. Palermo is significantly out of our way, especially in rush hour. These harms are only mitigated if there is guaranteed attendance and busing for both our children to Heritage Glen. Further, the report and other communications mischaracterize the change being recommended. The majority of affected families are not returning back to Palermo. We have only attended Heritage Glen, and in purchasing our homes and organizing our schedules, budgets, and our children's care, have relied on board representations that Heritage Glen is our family's home school and that we are eligible for transportation there. Without guaranteed attendance for current families in transportation, the recommendation is for a new and disruptive change, not a repatriation. Whereas the report characterizes this disruption as being the only option and appears to use this purported lack of optionality to justify not formally consulting the community, I believe there are other options, which include maintaining the status quo and having Heritage Glen remain the home school for the North and South pockets, or taking additional time to consider and formally consult the community on alternatives, such as directing families in new and under construction developments to Palermo. These are the communities who have not already come to detrimentally rely on the board's representations that our children will attend and be bused to Heritage Glen. If the board is unable to guarantee attendance for current families, including siblings not yet in the school system, and arrange transportation to Heritage Glen for these children, then I oppose the recommendation and urge you to take additional time to develop and consider and formally consult on alternatives.
1 minute.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So do we have any questions for the delegate? Trustee Shuttleworth.
Thank you. I do have one question.
Yes.
You spoke about the busing.
Yes.
If you were to go to Palermo, you would receive busing.
If we were to go to Palermo, we would receive busing. Palermo would start an hour later, and we'd be required to pay for before care. Thanks.
Are there any more questions at this time? Vice Chair Harrison.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for making your delegation and all of the information that you have provided. I was just wondering, I was taking some notes. Could you just tell me how the ages of your students again, please?
So I have a daughter who's in junior kindergarten. She's 4.5, and I have another daughter who's in daycare, and she's 2 years old. So we anticipated that they would both be attending school together when my daughter came of junior kindergarten age.
And is the daycare at the school?
The daycare is not at the school
Okay.
right now, but it's on Heritage Way, so it's right along the same path. But our daughter attends aftercare in the school, our older one.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Okay, so there are no other questions at this time. So thank you very much. So we have another delegate. I'm terribly sorry. Is it Reyes?
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Again, the Palermo Boundary Review.
Good evening. The name is Reyes Hussein Amer, or as my daughter calls me, Reese's Pieces. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak. My son and daughter are amongst the small group of children impacted by this boundary review. My son's in JK, and my daughter is in grade 2. I'm going to read an element of the report. Upon request, existing elementary students residing in the North and South study areas and currently attending Heritage Glen will be granted optional attendance to continue to attend Heritage Glen up until completion of grade 8. So we, as a family, very much appreciate that criteria as stated in the report, and we will likely be availing the flexibility which the report offers us. Barring aside the busing issue, granted, my children do not take the bus at this point of time, but losing the flexibility to be able to take the bus down the line is a consideration, which my friend over here also did elaborate on. So coming back to the exception which is cited in the report, giving us an exception to stick it out at Heritage Glen, we wish to seek, as a family, a similar exception-based policy for our children when they go to high school. Currently, if we keep our children at Heritage Glen, which we likely will, they will end up at Garth Webb, whereas most of the elementary school classmates of theirs will end up at Abbey Park. And I understand the rationale and the logic behind why you've provided the exception-based policy for Heritage Glen. It's likely to ensure continuity and continuity of the cohort. My request is for you to apply the same exception and same logic for this very small group of children for the future when it comes to high school, where continuity and cohort is going to matter as well. I am only anticipating that when my daughter and my son reach grade 8, grade 9, that they'll likely will want to remain with their friends who will most likely all be going to Abbey Park. I understand that numbers play a very significant role in planning, and I know that, Garth Webb versus Abbey Park, numbers may play a determining factor, but similar to the way, an exception's been provided for Heritage Glen versus Palermo, also based on the fact that it's a very small number of children, I'm really hopeful that an exception could be provided when it comes to high school. And I'm really hoping that the very small number of grandfathered children, only as it pertains to this particular report, would need to be affected. And that's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for our delegate? Vice Chair Al Harrison.
Okay, thank you very much for all of the information and for presenting tonight. My question is maybe not for you, but it's a curiosity because I know that, or what I think is in scope for this was an elementary boundary review, and what you're talking about is a secondary boundary review. So I don't think that we have the luxury to all of a sudden make such a change within this process. I don't think that it in any way takes away the opportunity for an optional attendance process, although I know Abbey Park is stacked and packed at this moment in time and projected to be so. So I guess what I'm asking is, and I'm not sure if I should be doing it here or under our agenda item, but just to confirm kind of what's in scope and what's out of scope for this particular review.
Through you, Vice Chair Al Harrison, and to all trustees and to the delegation, it isn't within the scope of this particular boundary review because it is a secondary issue, but I can assure everyone in here that we have a pretty coherent optional attendance process from grade 8 to grade 9. And we have the superintendents sit with the principals of both schools, and they go through the optional attendance requests each individually, one by one. And there's various criteria they use, not necessarily in order of priority, but we do try to keep families together. And we do take a look, all these superintendents around the room would affirm that we look very closely at keeping cohorts together too. If children are in a particular school in grade 8 and virtually everybody else in the class is going to the same high school, that jumps to the top of the queue. I obviously cannot guarantee that at this point, but I can tell you, and I'd look to any superintendent or associate director to weigh in, that it certainly would be looked at in order to support any child, but also, you know, in your specific case, your children, if that's what you wish, you'd apply for optional attendance. The principals would sit down with the superintendents and they'd make a decision. But that is one of the things that we try to do, keep families together, keep cohorts together. When numbers are astronomical, though, sometimes, you know, we've got to be transparent that that's not always, we can't always do it, but mostly we do it. I would, you guys agree? Sorry? You want to comment, Superintendent Ruddock or Superintendent Blackwell?
I can certainly comment further. So we do have a robust optional attendance process from elementary to secondary. As Trustee L. Harrison highlighted, it is within the context of some significant enrollment pressures at Abbey Park. But we do spend a great deal of time discussing each application. All of the principals in Oakville and all of the superintendents for Oakville are in the room and carefully considering each application. So that's certainly a process you could use for your goals.
May I say something? Just 30 seconds.
You ended a minute early, so we'll grant you that.
All right. I very much appreciate your comments, and I wasn't aware of the optional attendance process. So thank you for educating me. Thank you for educating me on that. One reason why I actually brought this up is because the report does explicitly have a sentence or two which talks about the children being enrolled at Garth Webb eventually. But I appreciate that there is a process for optional attendance, and many years down the line, whenever the time comes, I'll likely will avail it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank both of the delegates on behalf of the Board of Trustees. It's good to hear from our community when we're making decisions that affect them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we're moving on to 2.3 presentations, and we have one presentation this evening. Mr. Fullen, you're welcome to come back.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present to the board. My name is Josh Fullen. The organization I work for, Maximum City, was contracted in the late summer to do a stakeholder engagement program for the development of the new multi-year plan. And I'm here this evening to share the findings of that program. I have about 10 slides that speak in a very high-level way to the aggregate findings from each of the stakeholder groups, and then I'll open the floor to questions if you have any at the end. So just to give you a sense of the number of folks that we engaged, there were over 4,000 participants in the stakeholder engagement program. And the four key stakeholder groups were the logical ones: parents and guardians, students, staff, and community members. And that number was, we reach people primarily in two ways: through an online survey, which is about 85% of that 4,100 number. Most of the folks engaged through an online survey, but we were able to go a little bit deeper through things like focus groups and pop-ups and going into classrooms where we got some really quality feedback from staff and students and parents as well. And just to give you a little bit of insight into our reporting process, this is sort of what it looks like inside where the sausage gets made for these things. We look at the qualitative data We look at all the comments within a spreadsheet, and then we go through a coding system where we pull themes and findings, and those themes and findings then inform the aggregate findings, which are the bulk of the report. And at the end of the report, we've provided some overall recommendations to inform the development of the new NYP. And this is the report that was produced at the end of the stakeholder engagement program. It looks longer really than it is because it's mostly appendices. There's about 25 to 30 pages of key findings and recommendations, and the rest of it is sort of the raw data in the appendices. I want to share with you some of the aggregate findings across stakeholder groups. So these were things that we heard in common from parents, from students, from community members, and from staff as well. And I won't go into detail in the sort of sub-bullets, but I would like to share some of the aggregate findings in a very high-level way. So the first theme we identified from stakeholders was around vision and values. And we heard that most respondents really, the current vision statement resonates with them. They actually like the current vision statement. There were some suggestions on how to improve it, and that detail is in the report. But it was something that most stakeholders found resonated with them. They also found that the current 6 guiding values also resonated strongly with most people, and that's what that graphic on the right demonstrates. There were some suggestions for focusing on some of them and tweaking some of them, but really, I think those findings affirm the content of the existing MYP and should be carried forward into the next one. In terms of continuing that first aggregate finding, theme 1 around vision and values, many respondents want the next MYP goals to focus less on percentage targets tied to things like EQAO, while still providing clear and measurable targets along with strategies for achieving these targets. So that could be either within the MYP itself, or if that's not the place for it, within another board plan that is communicated to stakeholders. Another thing that we heard in common across groups was that respondents wanted well-being and equity, each represented as separate themes. And well-being in particular, a lot of respondents said they want that to be an overarching theme and focus for staff and students with an emphasis on supporting mental health. And I'll skip down to that third bolded bullet point now. Respondents want sustainability and environmental stewardship to be added in some meaningful capacity to the next MYP. They really felt that was perhaps a gap in the existing one, particularly students who feel like the climate issues are paramount to their generation and their future. They want to see that intentionally included in the MYP and speak to it in a real and concrete way. The next theme from the aggregate findings was around teaching and learning, and many respondents want to see teaching strategies broadened to tap into and develop the diverse strengths and interests of students to enable them to thrive. So that's enabling all learners to thrive in a learning environment. Many respondents want to see strategies for making school more engaging and relevant to students, including strategies on how to engage student voice and choice in shaping their own learning. Respondents want to see more of an emphasis on teaching and building academic, digital, social, and personal skills to ensure students succeed at school and in life. So there's a lot of emphasis both on sort of core curriculum and academic skills, but also on soft skills as well, in terms of what we heard around teaching and learning. And then the final few findings from the teaching and learning theme. Many respondents want to see continued and improved supports and strategies for making the physical and social school environment healthy, safe, inclusive, and welcoming. Many parents and students want more support with transitions, particularly from grade 8 to grade 9. We heard this from students and from parents quite frequently. So we heard that the transition from kindergarten to grade 1 needed a little more support. We heard that the transition specifically from grade 8 to grade 9 needed much more support, and also transitioning out of secondary school into post-secondary or life beyond secondary school was also something that families wanted more support with. And then another key finding was around building strong relationships between teachers and their students. And I don't think that would come as a surprise. Relationships are key to sort of and fundamental to the work in schools, and students in particular found this to be a specific point of focus for how they perform in school and how they feel comfortable in school is having teachers who know them, who spend time getting to know them and build relationships. And then the third and final theme was around communication and engagement from the findings. Respondents across all groups want to be kept informed on the progress of the MYP goals throughout its next term, such as through annual updates, and those could be provided online or in an open format in a public meeting. Parents and community members want to see more consistent two-way lines of communication between themselves and school staff. And respondents want to see stronger connections and partnerships between schools and their local communities, including furthering the concept of community hubs within the HDSB. And then, so those are the overall aggregate findings across groups. And what I'm not going to get into in this presentation, but is contained in the report, are specific findings by stakeholder group. And those are a couple pages each and speak in detail to what each stakeholder group said in particular. And those, one of the recommendations that I'll just share a few from the report as well as one is that these be communicated back to stakeholder groups to close the loop in some sort of public way, either on the board's website or wherever the appropriate forum for that might be. There are 15 sort of overarching overall recommendations for next steps in the report. And I just chose a few of them here to highlight. Something that I think we learned throughout this process was that you don't need to change the MYP for the sake of change, because a lot of the feedback we heard affirmed what was already in the MYP, but also some of it was conflicting, which is normal in a process like this. You're going to get a different set of opinions. But we have provided you with some evidence now to be intentional about the updates and the changes that are made. Don't attempt to guide all actions or define every outcome from a central location. That was certainly something we heard from stakeholders. And it's a best practice in school governance. Clearly communicate the difference, relationship, and roles of board plans. So much of the feedback that we heard in the MYP engagement process was about the MYP itself, but some of it sort of fell outside the scope of the MYP. So I think there needs to be some clear communication about the different roles of board plans and how they sort of speak to each other. Put students at the center of the MYP. I have to say some of the most rewarding work we did in this process was working with the students in the HDSB, and they really had tremendous insights into how to improve the MYP, and also were very eager participants in all of the engagements we conducted with students, regardless of the context, no matter what school we were in, where the setting was, whether it was the trustees here or in a school classroom. Students really had a lot of valuable knowledge to share. And we provided some steps within the recommendations on how to put students at the center of the MYP. And then finally, and this sort of speaks to the previous point I made about sharing the stakeholder group findings publicly, is to present a draft of the new MYP to stakeholders sometime in the first 6 months of this year to show people how their feedback was incorporated, close that loop, and then to keep providing annual updates on the goals and the values of the MYP itself. And that's it. So I understand there are already working sessions happening on the MYP, but I'm happy to take any questions for those who have questions about the presentation or about the report itself.
We do have a speakers list. Vice Chair Al Harrison.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for all of your team's work, pulling it all together and making good sausage, as you said. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to ask, what's your advice in terms of closing the loop? So based on what you heard from people and how they communicated with the team during the consultation process, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so again, we heard differing things about how to present information back to stakeholders. So I would say that there are two ways to do it effectively. One would be through an online sort of announcement via the website that you communicate to everyone through whatever the standard sort of online communication medium is. And then another way would be to present it in kind of in a public meeting format. Would be to get up in front of a room and hold it. Maybe you could hold it in one central location or two central locations and then present it that way. Again, I would say that it's important to reach people both online and in person. It could even happen in a setting like this, but that would be sort of based on what we heard from folks, that they want to hear from the board both in person and online. That would be sort of the way to go.
And then Trustee Oliver.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I just want to say that I think this was a really excellent process, and it gave us a really great report with a lot of really good, actionable feedback and input from the various stakeholder groups. And I do want to emphasize that all of the steering committee, and I'm sure everybody involved in this process, has taken a really good look at the stakeholder feedback. And in particular, I know that we paid a lot of attention to what the students had to say, and we kept coming back to the comments that they had made about their learning, the inspirations for the school culture, and the methodology of learning, and the new creative and kind of innovative practices. So we are paying a lot of attention to that, and we're taking the student voice very seriously. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. That's good to hear.
Okay, so there's no one else on the speakers list. So thank you very much for all the work you and your team have done. It was a very enlightening process, actually, and to see it all come together, because I saw you at the pop-ups and the focus groups, and saw the survey go out, as I'm a parent as well. I really appreciate all the work that put in and the excellent report that you've given us a lot of meat for that sausage that we're making.
Right. So I regret introducing that metaphor into this meeting now. And I just want to thank the board and the steering committee as well. I have to say this felt like really good work that we did as an organization, and it's, I just want to thank the steering committee for providing support and guidance, and to the 4,000 plus HDSB community members who provided us with feedback to write this report, which will now put you in a good position to write a new MYP that really reflects community quite strongly. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And just to let the trustees know that that report's going on to our website, and we'll be linking it to tonight's agenda. And of course, this presentation is video voice recorded.
That's great. Just the final comment I'll make is that the first 30 pages are for public consumption. The final appendices are not for public consumption. Just want to alert you to that.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fullen. Okay, so we are now up to the consent agenda items. So I'm going to put the motion on the floor. Be it resolved that the Halton District School Board approve the consent agenda action items and receive the information items for February 19, 2020, moved by Trustee Gray, seconded by Trustee Rocha. Is there any discussion at all on the consent agenda items? We don't have a lot, just the order paper and the minutes. Nope, seeing none. Okay. All those in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, we are now up to ratification action items of Vice Chair Harrison. Do we have any business from private session that requires approval?
Nope, not this evening. Thanks for asking, though.
Always a pleasure. Okay, so now we're up to action items for February 19th, 2020. We have 4 this evening. I'd like to draw your attention to item 1, policy approval, third-party agreements, report 20017 on page 9 of the board package. May I have a mover, please? Trustee Garretts, and seconded by Trustee Rocha. Thank you. I will read the recommendation. Be it resolved that the Halton District School Board approve the new third-party agreements policy as attached to report 20017. Is there any debate? Vice Chair Harrison.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, it's more of a comment just for to welcome and to say to the people that are watching in the gallery and the thousands of viewers at home that this topic and the other ones that are for action tonight were also before the board 2 weeks ago, where there were presentations given by senior staff and trustees at that point would have asked many of the questions that they had. So the fact that no questions are asked tonight, I think is testament that we had that conversation last time and people are feeling comfortable to make a decision. Yeah. And if anybody has any questions about last time, that can be viewed online on the recording.
Okay, since there's no debate, we'll vote on this policy. All those in favor? Thank you, Superintendent Ngoy. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'd like to draw your attention to item 2, Palermo Boundary Review, Report 20018 on page 12 of the board package. Welcome, Superintendent Ruddick. May I have a mover, please? Trustee Oliver, seconded by Trustee Amos. Thank you very much. I'll read in the recommendation. Be it resolved that the Halton District School Board adjust the boundaries for the elementary schools in ERA 114 and 115 as outlined in option 1 and detailed in report 20018 effective September 2020. Are there any questions or any debate? Trustee Oliver.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So 2 weeks ago when this report came to the board, I had asked a number of questions. While I empathize with the Palermo families that are affected by this proposed boundary change, I do support this recommendation with more of a vision for the Palermo neighborhood and its children going forward. I think it is good for students to attend a school that is in their own neighborhood, where they can build friendships that extend between the school and home, and where they end up going to the same high school. I realize that for the students presently at Heritage Glen, it may not be desirable to them or their families to change schools. Every student gets attached to the school that they attend and see it as their own community. I also appreciate that, as pointed out during tonight's delegation, that for these affected families, this is a school move, as HG is the only school that these families were ever directed to. Therefore, I'm grateful for the inclusion of an optional attendance as an option to those students who wish to remain at Heritage Glen. My question to the Superintendent Ruddock is, can you please elaborate on how the optional attendance process outlined in this report differs from the regular optional attendance process that families need to go through, and what does this mean to transportation?
So through the chair to Trustee Oliver, our regular optional attendance process, in fact, the timelines have closed. So by approving this recommendation, we would be reopening the timelines for the families in the Heritage Glen community who wish to remain. Typically, when a school is not open for optional attendance, the principal is required to decline the request, and then it must be appealed to the superintendent. In this revised process for the families in the Heritage Glen community, the form simply needs to be submitted to the principal of Heritage Glen, and the principal of Heritage Glen has been granted authority to approve it immediately. So it won't be subject to a decline and appeal process. As with all optional attendance requests in our board, it is it's not granted with transportation. It is that is outside of the policy. However, families can apply for what we call a courtesy seat if there is a bus that is desirable to apply for. They can certainly make a request for an empty seat or a courtesy seat on a bus. Also in our optional attendance process, it is an annual process. However, families in the Heritage Glen community who wish to remain there would be granted optional attendance through to completion of grade 8 without a reapplication.
Vice Chair Al Harrison.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, and I may have to go on the speakers list a couple of times, but I just wanted to go back to one of the things, firstly, that our first delegate had mentioned, just around process, because process is important and it's a way to engage with the community in a meaningful way. And I think there might be some, I guess, misunderstanding between Pathway 1 and Pathway 2. And while my understanding is that while it most appropriately fit into Pathway 2 because there were limited options being considered, that a hybrid was undertaken in the sense that it was Pathway 2 yet community consultation and authentic, as far as I'm concerned, as a person that read that information and attended the public meeting, was undertaken. So it's a bit of a hybrid process. And that's something that we also did in the Samuel Curtis area. There was only really one option being considered, but yet we still hosted that public engagement piece and did an online piece and so on. So I just wanted your, I guess, confirmation, opinion on that, just because, again, the process piece is really important.
Through the chair to the vice chair, in front of you, you will see that the modified process, and this chart will appear later on this evening in a different boundary review, one where there was not a public meeting because of the situation of that boundary review, and I'm referring to Aldershot. This public meeting was an opportunity to have a conversation with the families that are impacted. We knew that there were a small number of families. It also allowed for us to hear some of their questions and their concerns, and you'll see that reflected in the report in terms of the optional attendance options that are there for grandfathering the students that are in grade 7, and for also understanding some of the unique situations. One of the things that came up out of that evening was a question around childcare at the schools. And from that meeting, we were able to have a conversation with the child care providers at both Heritage Glen and Palermo, and there is room at both of those locations. That's something that I don't believe we were able to share at the last meeting. So that information evening allowed us to take the information that was provided to us for the report, and also in terms of bring it back to the steering committee. So it was, I know that there's some conversation around a delegation and what am I thinking of, the petition that was shared with us that evening. We received a petition and also brought that information back to the steering committee. So the decision was made to have that open house based on some of the feedback we were receiving.
Trustee Gray.
Thank you, through the chair. Earlier tonight, through one of the delegates, I think we heard that there's a hardship that will be incurred by many of the parents because there's a very different start time between the two schools. Could you clarify for me the start times of both of those schools? And was there any consideration to look at massaging that a little bit to help the parents that might be affected by this decision?
Through the chair to Trustee Gray. So I don't have the exact start times off the top of my head, but it is 8:15, I believe, for Heritage Glen and 9:15 for Palermo. So that is certainly something that we heard through both the public information evening and through the feedback form. and that is also reflected in the report. That was really one of the driving forces for offering optional attendance for families to remain at Heritage Glen, recognizing that families have planned around these different start times, and given that there is such a discrepancy. Looking at massaging the start times to lessen that impact would really impact the families in Palermo who have structured their home routines around those start times. And we know that changing a start time of a school is a pretty significant undertaking for transportation. So that really wasn't an option, and that's why we turned to the optional attendance process and giving families an option to remain at Heritage Glen if that suited their family better.
Go ahead.
Yes, just a follow-up. I think I heard just a few minutes ago that optional attendance would be basically pre-approved for the career span of a child going through that would be affected, so that it wouldn't have to be approved every year. It's pre-approved, green light all the way through. Is that precedent setting? Is that the first time we've done that?
Through the chair to Trustee Gray, I don't believe that is precedent setting. I believe in the Samuel Curtis boundary review that was before you a couple of months ago, that similar option was put forward in terms of offering optional attendance to existing students. But it's something that is considered through the boundary review process. So I don't believe it is precedent setting, but certainly a worthwhile offer to the families in this community.
Director Miller?
Through you, Chair Devens, to Trustee Gray. It is not precedent setting in any way. We've changed the name of it, and that reflects the actual process. For many years, we called it grandfathering, then we called it grandparenting, and now it's around optional attendance, the process. And we've done it in many, many boundary reviews where students that were already in the school were able to continue at the school they were currently in. This is the same process, but it reflects the appropriate terminology now, calling it optional attendance and so on. So this has gone on for many, many years in many boundary reviews where we've allowed students to remain at the school that they were in.
Trustee Collard.
Thank you. Through you to the superintendents. I'm looking at the enrollment chart, the projections for the next 10 years, and I see that Heritage Glen will have space for a good number of years to come. So is there any reason to believe that should a parent have children that are not yet in school, that they would be denied optional attendance at Heritage Glen for a child that's currently not in school? So in the case of our first delegate who came and she has a 2-year-old at home, that child won't be starting school for another 2 years. Is there any reason to believe, given the numbers that are in front of us, and I know numbers are subject to change, but given the numbers that are in front of us, is there any reason to believe that optional attendance would be denied that child?
Through the chair to Trustee Collard, there are a couple of parameters upon which optional attendance is granted. Certainly looking at the overall space available in the school is one. However, looking at also the class size and ensuring that we're compliant with ministry class size mandates, we are not able to approve an optional attendance application where it will impact staffing. So if it tips a class over a class, primary class size cap, that would trigger the creation of an additional class and an additional teacher. At that point, it would be something that we would not be in a position to approve. So it's hard to predict. Because we know that projections are done on an annual basis. It's hard to know 2, 3, 4 years out what the class sizes will be. But certainly where an optional attendance request can be granted to keep a family together, it is certainly something that we would want to grant.
Thank you for that.
Okay, so there are no more speakers on the speakers list, so we will move to calling the question. Oops. All those in favor? Kevin, can you provide us with the results? Trustee Lau? Thank you. That carries unanimously. We will be implementing the boundary. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to draw your attention to item 3 in this section. Milton, quote, to be determined area boundary review, report 20021. This is Superintendent Newton. On page 20 of your board package, may I have a mover, please? Thank you, Trustee Garrett, seconded by, Trustee Daniele. Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. I will read the recommendation into the record. Be it resolved that the Halton District School Board determine the elementary school boundaries for the Milton to be determined area bounded by the southeast corner of Dairy Road and Regional Road 25 in Milton, whereby effective immediately, elementary students are directed to attend Anne J. MacArthur Public School for kindergarten to grade 8 for English and grades 2 to 8 for French immersion programming. Is there any debate? Trustee Garrett.
I just have a comment. This is an area of, for those that don't know, it's construction that is pending to be built. I have made it clear that I think our projections might be a little low. However, you know, when it's not built and people aren't in there yet, we don't really know. But I do support it 100%.
Okay, thank you. There are no more speakers on the speakers list, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. We'll be implementing that boundary change. Okay, I'd like to draw your attention. Hold on one second. I'd like to draw your attention to item 4 in this section. Report suspensions, expulsions, and behavioral intervention strategies. Report 20023 on page 25 of the board package. Vice Chair Harrison, would you like to move this? Sure. And seconded by Trustee Collard. Thank you very much. I will read this recommendation, and then Vice Chair Harrison, would you like to speak to it after that? Okay. Be it resolved that the Halton District School Board direct the director to prepare an initial report for trustees by March 2020 regarding suspensions, expulsions, and how behavioral intervention strategies are being utilized, and that subsequent reports be added to the annual cycle of board reports of September. Go ahead, Vice Chair Harrison.
Thank you. And I can't remember if I spoke to this last time, so I will be brief. Through you, Madam Chair, I just want to say that I think this is a matter of public interest, and certainly trustees have expressed an interest in learning more about and understanding suspensions, expulsions, and behavioral intervention strategies that are taking place in the board. So I'm grateful that staff have indicated that the data is available and can be presented in short order, and then that we can look forward to annual updates on that. I think it really ties into both our past multi-year plan and the one that we are developing. Our presenter tonight said that our community really feels like well-being and mental health should be rising to the top, and I think this is one piece of that. So thanks, and it'll be great, should this pass, to hear the report. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a speaker on the speakers list. Trustee Amos.
Thank you. I will be supporting this recommendation, as I know we've had this information come to us in the past, but I believe that coming to us on a regular cycle will be make it transparent and will make it better for information and decision making. My only question is to the director whether September is appropriate timing for this report to be coming forward. And is that okay with staff?
Thank you. Through you, Chair DeBrence, to Trustee Amos. I will look to Superintendent Podebaric. I believe it's fine, but I'll let him respond as he would be preparing it.
It's no trouble to prepare the report for the dates outlined. We have the data, and it's just pulling together the practices we're already doing in the schools. We're used to deadlines.
Okay, I just want to make sure September is the right timeline.
Yeah, well, that'll catch your year end. That's a good, so it'll be a full look at the years past. And the March one is just an initial start. So both fit well, I believe.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, there are no more speakers on the speakers list, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. We're looking forward to receiving that report. Okay, we are now up to communications to the board. First off is item 5.1, student trustee reports. Trustee Lau and Trustee Burns, do you have a report for us this evening? Go right ahead.
Through the chair to all trustees and superintendents, Trustee Burns and I are so excited to give this student trustee report today. We're going to be keeping it short and sweet, so I'll start by giving an update on the student trustee election and our upcoming Ostaeco Board Council Conference this weekend, and then I'll pass it off to Trustee Burns to cover the Student Amalgamation Committee comprised of student senators. So I'll begin with the student trustee election, which is next Tuesday here, beginning at 6 p.m. We have 18 candidates this year. Yes, woo! From 7 high schools across, 7 high schools across Halton. Each candidate will give a 4-minute speech, and all 90 student senators will be present to watch it live. Trustee Burns and I are both looking forward to seeing so many passionate leaders, which is a testament to how student voice is really expanding each and every year. In the meantime, Trustee Burns and I will both be in Ottawa this weekend for the Ostaeco BCC conference, where we'll network and learn from student trustees from all over the province. As always, we'll give our report at the next board meeting. Now I'll pass it off to Trustee Burns.
Thank you, Trustee Lau. I'll get right into the updates. So yesterday, the Student Amalgamation Committee, comprised of a number of student representatives, including some student senators from Nelson, Burlington Central, and Robert Bateman, met with Nelson Vice Principal Louisa Botello to further work on finalizing an outline for the creation of student councils at Burlington Central and Nelson next year. The group has created a comprehensive document that details the entire proposal, moving from the reason why the new system has been created to the Constitution outline itself. The principals from all 3 schools have been notified of this development and have been asked to review the document in its entirety and to provide any comments on their thoughts. These comments will then be reviewed by this Student Amalgamation Committee at their next meeting, which happens every Tuesday, or not every Tuesday, one Tuesday of every month, excuse me. And we'll welcome any questions. Thank you so much.
Trustee Shuttleworth.
Hi, I think my question is for Trustee Lau. You said that there were 18 candidates from 7 schools. Can I ask where the high schools across Halton? Are there some from the north, the south? That's my question.
Okay, I'll try and list them by memory. White Oaks, Garth Webb, MMR, Hayden, Milton District, Blakelock, and Iroquois. I said that already. Yeah.
So I have a follow-up. So I do notice that most of those are in both Oakville and Burlington. Has there been any, actions taken to try to encourage those northern schools to get more involved in trustee elections?
Thank you, Trustee Shuttleworth. Through the chair. So this year, Trustee Lau and I have been very focused on trying to have Northern students be more encouraged to run for student trustee, but also to participate more in the collection of student voice within Halton. We've made a number of attempts to do certain things that some have worked, some have needed to be postponed due to a variety of reasons that I'd be able to go into in more detail at a later date. But involving, for example, trying to move the Student Senate to a more geographically centralized location. I will also planning on hosting at some point a Northern Forum to encourage students from the North to learn more about the board's processes and involving their voice in board decision. Do you want to go ahead?
I can add.
You want to talk about email?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just through the chair to Trustee Shuttleworth. One of the things we did specifically for the election was we reached out to all of the principals, so we let them know. So they put out a morning announcement. So in theory, every single high school student should have heard that announcement. In addition to that, Trustee Burns and I, we also sent emails to the senators and posted on the classrooms, so they should have distributed it. And then one other thing that we did in particular was we reached out to the specific Instagram accounts. So, for example, the Georgetown has its own Instagram account. So we reached out to them and we got them to post it on their stories. So that should have gone to the high school students as well.
Thank you. That's great to hear that you are trying to sort of encourage more involvement from the North, because I do know that that's something that you're both passionate about and has been very difficult.
Okay, a few other people on the speakers list. Trustee Gray.
Yes, through the chair. Thank you very much. Just wondered if there was any update on the student conference that you had spoken about at the last meeting.
So HYLS, yes. Wonderful. So at present, the Halton Youth Leadership Symposium is still being planned by the Student Senate. We are speaking with our directors of HYLS, who are 2 student senators in the executive team, who are currently working on booking, probably sometime in late May, Sheridan College for HYLS, which has been something that has happened every year. We're also continuing to develop the different workshops alongside each other, with every single executive now taking time, even outside of Student Senate, to work with their working groups for each workshop, which is comprised of a number of student senators. And they are collectively working on these workshops, and we are, Olivia, our Trustee Lau and I, constantly checking in with them to ensure that these workshops are going to be very, very engaging for every single student who attends. And it's also the reason why we've had a very lengthy conversation with all of our student senators about which workshops to include, which we have presented at a previous board meeting as well.
Trustee Daniele.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair, to my colleagues. Next Tuesday will be a very exciting night with 18 students stepping forward and talking about what their vision is for the Halton District School Board and how they would best represent the more than 60,000 students that we have. If you can possibly attend, I'd encourage you to do so, because it is a very, very interesting and exciting night. And if not, then I'd encourage you to watch it online. It's even the ones that don't get elected, some of the ideas that they come up with are simply phenomenal.
Okay, there's no other speakers, so I will chime in. So 18 is a lot. I hope that, I'm just going to make a suggestion, not because my last name has anything to do with anything, but I hope that you choose your speakers in a random fashion, because as going down that alphabetical list might get a little, biased. But the one thing I did want to mention, and I'm sure, I don't think that you're aware, but today in the legislature, the very first question was actually prompted by a request by the Student Trustees Association with regards to asking the minister about coming up with a provincial plan for anti-Black racism. So it's great to see the student voice going very far and wide and being heard and looking for answers and results. So go ahead, Director Miller.
Thank you, Chair Drabentz. I want to congratulate you two. I think our student trustee elections has been improving year after year after year, and I mean it's also due to the trustee mentors and so on, but it's primarily due to the student trustees, and I want to applaud you for doing that. 18 candidates is remarkable, and I always attend, and they're great speeches, and I wish one of you two great luck. But I do have a serious question. What is the focus of ACO this year? Because I think it's important that we bring that voice back from student trustees around the province back to the board. Not just the Senate, though. I think it's important for it to be at this table so that it can be shared with our principals in our schools as well.
So this past year, ACO has been especially focused on collecting student opinion and student voice surrounding the changes to education and what is going on right now with the provincial government in relation to education. So the largest collection of student voice that ACO has collected is all combined into one e-learning report survey. So ACO tackled e-learning specifically and collected opinion from students all across Ontario on what they believe is possible with e-learning and also how they will be directly impacted by the implementation of mandatory e-learning classes. Now, this was created back when the plan was still for 4 mandatory classes throughout high school, but even with mandatory e-learning classes still a possibility, I do not believe that the opinions in that report should have changed very much, if at all. Recalling from memory, back when that report was presented to us at FGM, so back in October, November, if I remember correctly, the percentage of students who approved of all that information was somewhere in the, Trustee Lau, 3 to 5%, something of that nature. But we do have the entire report available to us, and we can share that with the Board of Trustees if requested. 28 pages, yes. I believe, how many students were part of that? A few? Like many thousands of students were part of this survey.
Over 6,000.
Over 6,000 students. So that is the...
From over 60 school boards.
Yeah. That's been ACO's main focus this year. I'm certain that at BCC's this weekend, Trustee Lau and I are going to learn more about ASTA's current actions and what the executive team has been up to recently. But at the moment, that has been the main focus of the year. And every year, ACO also creates a vision document, which outlines their plans for the following year, and that will be available for us AGM, I believe, which is later this spring.
Is the report available on the Halton Senators website at all?
So it is not at the moment, but what would be possible and something that I think Trustee Lau and I would be very interested in doing is dedicating a section of that website towards ACO activity so that students in Halton can learn about how their voice is being used at the provincial level to advocate for issues that benefit them in some way. That would certainly be something of interest for Trustee Lau and I to go after, and I don't think it would take very much time at all.
And I sent the email to everyone.
Thank you very much. Okay, and Trustee Daniele.
Thank you very much. And just following up on Director Miller, just to let you know that Trustee Collard and myself in our work through OPSPA and our meeting this week with the OPSPA Board of Directors will be receiving a report on the liaison between OPSPA and ASTA, because the Ontario Public School Board Association has been working on how they further support student trustees. And there was a meeting at PES in which they discussed self-advocacy, senior and junior student senate, transportation to student senate, student trustee PD budgets, and more. And they are going to be creating a best practices handbook to be a resource for both student trustees and adult trustees, with a soft launch in 2020 and an official launch at the Public Education Symposium in 2021. So once Trustee Collin and I have more information on that, we can bring that back to you as well. So like Director Miller, around the province, boards of trustees are sitting up and paying attention to what the student trustees have to say, because often they're the wisest people in the room, I find.
Just further to your report, would you be amenable for us to add the link under the student trustee report to the agenda package this evening? Is that okay? Can that happen, Manager? Okay. No doubt it'll be done in seconds. Okay, so there are no more questions for you. Thank you very much for your report. And we are now up to action items for March the 4th. For those watching, sometimes we have items that meet established criteria to come to the board table twice before voting. We have 2 items this evening that meet that criteria. I'd like to draw your attention to number 521, Aldershot French Immersion Boundary Review, Report 20024 on page 26 of your board package. Welcome, Manager Ranzella, Superintendent Truffin, Superintendent Blackwell. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair Gavens. Trustees, you have in front of you a report that has been done on the Aldershot French Immersion boundary. This report came to you late January, and tonight we have a recommendation for you to consider. So tonight's agenda will be the recommendation, a background, the criteria to validate the recommendation, and just talking a little bit about and showing you the option and our rationale for the recommendation. The recommendation was be resolved that the Halton District School Board adjust the boundaries for Aldershot High School French Immersion. And in the report, you do have option 1. You do also have some an appendix that we've included for you. And we're just going to go through a very brief presentation where we would be happy to answer any questions that you have at the end. And both Superintendent Blackwell and General Manager Ranzella are going to be helping me tonight.
So I'd like to acknowledge the work of the committee. We have trustees for the area, Trustee Reynolds, trustee for the non-affected area, Trustee Rocha, as well as our colleague, Superintendent colleague, Julie Hunt-Gibbons from Secondary Program and the Planning Department, General Manager Ranzella, and Senior Planning Analyst, Michelle Dagar. So the role of the steering committee, it's outlined for you up there. I'm sure you can read it. Determining and communicating which schools are part of this process, and in this case, it is Burlington Central and Aldershot in terms of the secondary French immersion program. Looking at generating initial boundary options, and in this case there was one. If you'll recall, we talked about this being a unique situation. So as we talked about earlier this evening, the part of this role of the steering committee is to determine the pathway. And in the first pathway, there is a large community consultation. This pathway is the second alternative in that there is informing the community rather than a consultation based on a need that came to us with student option sheets. So that's why we're coming to this at this time of year, because it became very apparent to us that the French immersion numbers for this high school for starting grade 9 next year were extremely low. The board will recall that in the PAR recommendations and decisions in June of 2017, prior to that, numbers for French immersion in secondary school were also very low, and we had made a commitment to monitor. So this is something that we have been monitoring, and the planning department's been monitoring through the LTAP process. In front of you, you'll see the timeline, and as I just alluded to, the timeline's very, very tight. Given that we want to have a decision for families and for students, they have submitted course option sheets, and students that are entering high school need to know those decisions for their program choices. Here are the numbers, last year's numbers. You'll see that French immersion, there were 9 students that were in the grade 9 program. Last year, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the numbers have been low for many, many years. This is not a new trend. And that the numbers are decreasing. When we look at our projections, we assume that that they will continue to decrease or not be a viable program. So if you consider a maximum of 7 students entering grade 9 next year, and students that would be in grade 10, that's 16 students across 2 grades. Double that a couple years down the road, you've got 32 kids in 9 to 12 French immersion, and it's not something that you can staff and provide adequate program for.
Thank you, Superintendent Blackwell. The steering committee recommended the option 1 using our criteria based on our admin procedure. We talked about viability of program. The option presented to you today certainly provides a viable program for Burlington Central High School. It provides a larger cohort for students in French immersion when with the option indicating directing them to Burlington Central High School. It also ensures stable long-term boundaries for both Aldershot High School and Burlington Central High School. And certainly this was the unanimous, we only did look at one option, and the steering committee was absolutely in agreement that this was the option that we wanted to present to the director, and the admin council and the director supports this option presented to you this evening. Very, very quickly, the current maps. If you look at these are the current boundaries. So the map on the left is the English boundary. The green is Aldershot. The blue is Burlington Central. And on the right-hand side is the French immersion boundary. It's identical. French immersion, blue on the right, and then green Aldershot on the left. This is what we are recommending. The English boundary is unchanged for both Burlington Central and Aldershot High School. However, we are recommending a change for the French immersion boundary for Aldershot High School, and so now it's all blue. The blue now will be directed to Burlington Central High School. This is, again, data that the planning department has provided us. One of the criteria was balancing the enrollments. You can see on the ground capacity at all of our schools, the percent of utilization 2019 in Aldershot is at 80%. Burlington Central is at 72%. I do want to highlight that these numbers are for 7 to 12. Both these schools, as you know, are grades 7 to 12, and these percent utilizations are for 7 to 12. So you can see that certainly Central will increase gradually. Aldershot is going to also increase, and that has a lot to do with our iSTEM program that we've implemented this school year. So our recommended option, and it was only one option, is grade 9 French immersion program will be directed to Burlington Central High School for September 2020, and transportation will be provided in accordance with the transportation policy. So if you live more than 3.2 kilometers away, we will provide transportation. This is important. The second point is very important, certainly to the community, and I know Trustee Reynolds. French immersion program will begin to phase out at Aldershot High School. So what that means is students in grade 9, like right now, prior to September 2020, will complete the French immersion program at Aldershot High School. We are not directing any current Aldershot High School students to Burlington Central. They will finish off their time at Aldershot High School. And then the last one, we will continue to monitor the number of Aldershot French immersion grade 8 students opting for grade 9 French immersion, and that will continue to be done with our LTAP. General Manager Renzella has made that commitment that we will monitor if there is a huge number of French immersion students in grade 8 at Aldershot, the LTAP would monitor that. We are happy to take any questions or comments at this time.
There is a speakers list, and we will start with Trustee Collard.
Thank you. I'm a little bit concerned about the students staying at Aldershot to complete grade 12 French immersion. The numbers are so small. would they not have a more robust program if they went to Central to complete their French immersion?
Thank you for that question. Through the chair to Trustee Collard. It seemed to be fine this year. Certainly we have staffed it accordingly. With the French immersion program, sometimes they're mixed stacking courses. But they seem to be fine doing that. I have not been given any optional attendance requests from grade 9 students going to another school. Grade 9 students.
That's good. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Trustee Shuttleworth.
That was one of my questions. So I have kind of two questions. When you had the map with all the colored bits that goes above the blue bits for Aldershot, that's one. So the area in the north there, that area there, are there many students that live up there? Is that not kind of
through the chair to Trustee Sherwood, that's what is called Upper Tyndaga area.
Oh, no. So I'm talking about
This area right here.
No. Further away.
Here.
Further to the, that way there.
Here.
Yeah.
There are kids there, not a lot, but there is no question that this area, that is by far the closest high school and elementary school as well.
Okay, and my second question, which I don't know if it kind of comes into what Trustee Collard was asking, with those low numbers of students that are at Aldershot, does that impact class size as far as balancing out? Because you have a class that would be smaller due to population, does that mean that with the provincial class size mandates, do we then need to have a class at that school that's larger?
Yes. The sectioning there to run low number of classes makes some classes larger.
Okay.
Trustee Reynolds.
Thank you. Through the chair to, I guess, my fellow trustees, I have just a couple comments, and I'll leave with a question. I've had the opportunity to connect with some parents one-on-one and social media, as well as attending the Maplehurst Council, School Council, and I'm looking forward to connecting to the Aldershot School Council next week to hear their concerns. What I've learned thus far is that the recommendation to phase out French immersion out of Aldershot is, well, disappointing, as families are understandably attached to their school and want to remain there, and they appreciate the recommendation of allowing the current French immersion high school students to complete their learning until graduation. I'm glad to see that the report also indicates a commitment to continued monitoring. This may give elementary parents some comfort knowing that students coming down the pipeline, the French immersion pipeline, that if things change and we see admissions rates changing significantly, meaning more students stay in French immersion from grades 6 to 7 or 8 to 9, that our board would reflect on that in a similar approach to reflect on the population pressures and whether a viable program could be, I guess, repatriated. Until such time, could you comment on the opportunities for the elementary school students, the Maplehurst parents, who have grade 6 students, whether they can avail themselves an opportunity to request entry into the French immersion grade 7-8 program at Central to eliminate an additional transition, from grades 8 to 9.
Thank you. Through the chair to Trustee Reynolds, we've heard this evening of the process for optional attendance, and I think that we would, of course, welcome any of those families who are in grade 6 going into grade 7, an opportunity to apply for optional attendance to Burlington Central School, because it would be for grade 7, and that's why we have the optional attendance process, for that reason. So I absolutely.
Trustee Collard.
Okay, I know this is probably out of scope, but we're talking about 7 to 12 schools. So I'm going to ask, how many students are currently in grade 6 French immersion at that school? And perhaps we ought to be thinking about providing transportation and not making them go to Aldershot for 2 years and then transferring again.
Through the chair, Trustee Collard, that would be a boundary review. So out of scope, you said? No, I didn't say that. You said out of scope.
But you have to remember that these schools are both 7 to 12.
Yeah, no, and I get that, but these, we want to try to keep course together, but it's just unfortunately, and I mean this, it is disappointing, and as Trustee Reynolds knows, that we're doing this, but it's just the numbers are not viable, unfortunately, for grade 9 at Aldershot any longer. And being in that community for a number of years, I know they also want to stay with their cohort. So I think they would want to stay with their cohort at Aldershot for grade 7 and grade 8, and then make a decision going into high school. I haven't heard this communication went to Maplehurst Public School, the families. So those families know about it. Both Trustee Reynolds and I attended the Maplehurst School Council meeting. I haven't heard that. So we might be upsetting, if we redirect to Burlington Central, we may be upsetting some families who would say, I want to go to Aldershot for grade 7 and 8, then I'll make my decision.
Sure. So perhaps it's worth exploring. I realize it couldn't be part of this boundary review, but perhaps it's worth exploring. I know that not every student that takes French immersion in high school, in elementary school, takes it in high school, but it would be good to know if there are only 10 kids in grade 6 and they want to take French immersion. You know, it would just be good to know, I think.
Director Miller.
Chair events to Trustee Collard. It's certainly an interesting point you bring up, and I think we can monitor that to take a look at it going forward. Because we don't want to, I don't know what the word is, impede families' desires or wishes for their kids. And the kids, actually, at that age, students are picking. And so I'm certainly Superintendent Truffin and Superintendent Blackwell can work with the principals just to monitor, see what the situation is, and bring that back to the board if we find that is an ongoing issue. I think you've raised an interesting point that is difficult because it would be a boundary review process and so on. I would just like to comment around this. The Aldershot French Immersion Program has had low numbers for some time, and when we approach this and we talk about low numbers for the French Immersion Program, it sounds like it's negative towards the French Immersion. I prefer to say that this is positive towards iSTEM as opposed to negative, because that's where those students are going. The numbers are, the trend is even fewer students in the French Immersion going into grade 9 than previously, and we already had low numbers. But the place they're going is iSTEM. And I think this, the iSTEM is a real product of success for this board in attracting not just students from outside the area, but within the area as well. So, yeah.
Okay, so there are no more speakers on the speakers list, so we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Okay, the next one is number 522, Acton Boundary Review, Report 20022 on page 31 of your board package. Superintendent Podra-Barrick, welcome, and welcome back. General Manager Renzilla, and welcome Superintendent Pennyfather. The floor is yours.
Good evening, trustees. Before you have the report for the Acton Boundary Review, John and I will lead you through some slides. It's just a quick summary of the process. We're not going to dwell too much on some of the detailed process slides, but because this was a bit of a different boundary review, and we'll highlight some of those differences for you as we go. So this is Acton. Acton has 3 schools, population about 9,500, 1,300 students currently there. There's the one Halton Catholic School, St. Joseph's, kind of very similar size to Robert Little. So we're very much the school of choice in Acton for elementary parents right now. But we have Robert Little, Mackenzie Smith Bennett, and you'll see Acton District right there. The board motion regarding this boundary review was be it resolved, the Halton District School Board directs staff to undertake an elementary and secondary boundary review for the Acton community in the town of Halton Hills, which includes Mackenzie Smith Bennett, Robert Little, and Acton District, with the expected completion date of no later than June 2020. Just want to highlight that the genesis, before we leave this slide, the real genesis of this idea grew out of Acton itself and the administrators and leaders past and present in Acton. We've been talking about this a while. This was not about utilization rates or boundaries or moving families around. It was rooted in a sense of there may be a better reality in Acton, better reality that leads to improved student outcomes in terms of well-being and achievement. And that's what really drove this. So we actually had some committee meetings with, as I said, past administrators who are in system roles now, like Darlene White, Lisa Sarabin. We had all of the current admin. And this kind of grew out of people really rooted in these schools, who know these schools and have led the schools. And but having said all that, we talked about it. We talked about it at admin council, just in terms of an idea and a possibility. And we agreed it was a boundary review that should be pursued. So we formed a steering committee. And we decided in that steering committee that we would pursue a pathway 1. Just given, I mentioned at the outset, there's 1,300 students in Acton. Given the size of the students, yet we also had a limited option of just a single option, option 1. We still decided to go ahead with the forming of a boundary review committee because of the impacts are widespread and touch on all of our families in Acton. So we formed with the members, as you can see there on the slide. We want to thank Trustee Reynolds and we want to thank Trustee Reynolds and Trustee Gray for their participation, and as well as the planning staff. And as I mentioned at the outset, John Pennyfather, who was the chair of the BRC. So the current configuration is there, and the current number of students. We're looking at Robert Little. You can see his K to 5. This is outlined in the report, which you've read. Mackenzie Smith Bennett's at a K to 8. And Acton District's currently a 9 to 12. It is our smallest secondary school. What we looked at was a reconfiguration to say, let's move Robert Little and Mackenzie Smith Bennett both to kindergarten to grade 6 schools, in Acton District to a 7 to 12 school. The rationale we'll get into a lot later, but some of the highlights we wanted to note would be it would even out the enrollments in the 2K to 6 schools, which we felt really positive. And we also want to note, as I said earlier, that accommodation size is not an issue in these schools. None of these changes will involve any needs for portables or substantial capital upgrades to the schools. In other words, they're ready to go.
So we'd like to thank the representatives from Mackenzie Smith Bennett, Robert Little, and Acton District High School on the BRC. They were very engaged. They asked great questions, and they were very enthusiastic about being involved in the process. And in fact, one of them has since agreed to be on another board committee because they liked getting involved. So the experience that we had with those folks from Acton was very positive. So Scott mentioned earlier that this was a little different process. Note that there was 3 BRC meetings plus the public meeting. Typically there are more, and this was slightly different boundary review due to the fact that the discussion was status quo and option 1. There weren't no other options were brought forward through the process. So the three BRC meetings were sufficient. The communication timelines you can see above, and they're also in the report. And we had good turnout at our public meetings. We had a gallery at every one, and we also had a strong turnout for the public meeting. Lots of great questions for Michelle Lemaire when she was there. So the communication certainly got out there.
Can I'd just like to add as well, in terms of these communication, one piece I also reached out to the mayor of Halton Hills, Rick Bennett, and had a fulsome discussion with the mayor around this and the changes. And he to date was impressed with the process and the outreach, and noted the lack of communication to his office, which he said shows we must have been doing a thorough job. So the town of Halton Hills is aware and intrigued and supportive with this option as well.
Whenever you do a BRC, within our process, there are a lot of criteria that we look at, and then what we try to do is work with the BRC to really focus and see what's most important to them. So in terms of student experience, the criteria here is student experience. Does the option demonstrate an effort to reduce the number of school moves and our cohorts kept together? Are there stable long-term boundaries? Are we going to have to work at this again in a few years, or will this be a lasting fix? The viability of program, how many students are required to offer and maintain program? And there was a fair amount of discussion of this in terms of the high school, so it was very important to them. And the balance of overall enrollment, Scott already referred to that and showed you a slide in regard to that. And also community supports available. What came up here was there may be some great opportunities for the community of Acton. For example, the Early On Center is interested, and we have been contacted by other groups that would like to become part of this transition. So the highlights of the process. There was a high level of, as I said, there was a gallery at all of our meetings, and some parents expressed, there was 5 of 6 of our BRC members supported option 1 versus the status quo, so strong support among the BRC. And some parents expressed safety and logistical questions around the 7 to 12 model, and so we had Principal Lemaire from Central came up and took any and all questions, and we also presented the data and history of our current grade 7-12 schools, and all of this data went back into the rolling FAQ that was started at the beginning and is an important part of the communication process in all BRCs.
When this was brought back to the BRC, just to weigh everything at the end, we came back to many of the points where we began, but perhaps in a more informed way, just through our public consultations. I think we learned a lot through the process. We looked at the fewer transitions for students at Robert Little was just very clear to, especially to all the members, that this is a win for them. Fewer transitions is a support for students. It's quite clear in the research. Better grade 8 to 9 transitions within Aldershot. We've heard that even today from Josh in New Maximum City, that this is a concern of parents. It resonated with parents as well there, and especially with our BRC members who dug in deep, that this is an opportunity to improve that. Optimize enrollments at Acton District, resulting in increased course offerings. We are currently losing about 25% of Mackenzie Smith Bennett grade 8s are going to Christ the King in Georgetown. Through our experiences at Aldershot and Burlington Central, and through our faith in the school experience the students would have in Acton High after 2 years, we feel that number, our retention rate would go way up. It's virtually 100% in our 2 Burlington models. This would grow naturally through Acton kids. Simply retaining more Acton kids would get anywhere from 15 to 25 students a year more, and that can lead to, it would lead to more course selection. So we think that's an enhancement as well, just keeping more kids, more Acton kids in Acton. The junior and primary curriculum is 1 to 3 and 4 to 6. We think having 2 schools that are junior, clean curricular schools of primary and junior up to both K to 6 is a win as well. It keeps those 6s at Robert Little for next year, and they can finish a continuum of instruction that they've had. And similarly, it'll allow more of the cert time in MSB, which is currently really demanded by the 7-8s and the intermediates, to be directed to the K to 6 kids. So a little bit more, less focus on behavior, a little bit more on instruction at MSB. We'd have enhanced community supports. MSB's numbers would go down significantly. It looks like the utilization would be an issue, but the full intent is to fill up that every square inch of the school with community supports, which we hear again and again and again in Acton is such an issue. Access to early on prenatal supports for families, infant supports, parental supports, counseling. So we already have interest from Links to Care, who's the operator of the Early On Center, approached us a couple of years ago about coming into a school location. They're very interested in that. Childcare left. There are no licensed childcare spaces currently in Acton for not-for-profit. They had to, the YMCA left when you rolled out full-day kindergarten. This would be an opportunity to RFP and bring them back in. And we know there are others. There's the hub that is leaving right now, looking to wind down at MSB, but those services very much intend to stay up there, and we would have space to even enhance those and bring in more providers. So we're excited about that. That very much resonated with all of the residents. It hits on one of their common frustrations, that there's access to services, so they don't have to go to Milton. Diversity of supports and learning options for intermediate students. We've talked about this. Sometimes difficult to explain program options to parents in detailed ways, but you could look at Reach Ahead programs for grade 8 students into 9 within the same building. You could look at access to better facilities like music, science, art, tech. Other specialty areas would be an enhancement for 7 and 8 students who sometimes we struggle to engage at MSB for those final 2 years of their elementary career. This just gives more and better opportunities for them. And just renewed expectations around behavior. There is research on the 7 to 12 model that shows that students actually will perform up in terms of their maturity levels in a 7 to 12 building versus the final years of a K to 8 building. We think this would be a value-added piece as well. And then the last piece is balances enrollments at the 2 elementary schools. So we think that's important just in terms of resourcing, collaboration, and maintaining a significant number of at-risk kids. Sometimes smaller is better for those kids. So those would be the benefits. So with that in mind, the BRSC very much supported option 1. We also looked at, there's currently some special education classes, and we consulted with Mark Zonneveld and his team. There are life skills programs at MSB, and we decided a choice model would be the best because the needs of these kids can vary drastically. So we would have an option. They could stay at the life skills class past their grade 6 year for 7 and 8 at MSB if the parents selected that. They could transition to Silver Creek, which has life skills for grade 7 and 8, or they could start early at GDHS in the CPP. This seems like a rare option, but it has been used in a number of cases. So we would work with families and they would collaboratively pick that. And when that's explained to parents, they said, oh, okay, they were happy with that. Similarly, the learning disabilities class should demand for placements hold. That class would move, would have their first couple of years retained at MSB, and then for the 7 and 8 slide over to Acton District High School. So one small revision, I don't know if we can do this, but these changes would be effective September 2021, but we should have placed in here that the Robert Little change would be effective September 2020. In other words, Robert Little would keep their grade 6 students. It mentions that in the report, but not in the recommendation. And our crack planning staff have caught that. So I just wanted to make that clear, and perhaps we could amend that for March 4th. So we are open for any questions.
Okay, you have a couple of speakers on the speakers list. We're going to start with Trustee Oliver.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Superintendent Potter-Barrick and Pennyfather. It looks like there is general support from the BRC members around the proposed recommendation. I do have a few questions, so I'll go back on the list unless they all are answered at that point. I understand that there's some concern expressed by the affected community about the proposed grade 7 to 12 program model, and I can empathize with parents' apprehension of integrating grade 7 and 8 students with grade 9 to 12 students. So my two-part question is, and you've already begun to reference this, can you speak more to what research exists in this area that looks at the efficacy of such a model, specifically any benefits to the students from the academic, well-being, and or school culture perspective, and any potential concerns relating to these? And part two, can you tell us how such an integration of students, 7 through 12, works out logistically within the confines of a school?
Okay, I'll take the first one. Through the chair to Trustee Oliver, we heard quite a bit around the apprehensions, the fears, the hesitations around my grade 7 or 8s are not ready for high school. Well, they're not going to high school, they're going for grade 7 and 8 within the same building. That's why we brought Michelle Lemaire to speak directly. She did a wonderful job to allay those fears. That's why we answered every question. When you look at the research, and there's quite a bit, even within Ontario, looking at this model and fleshing it out. And I would say this from our own experience of running 2 7 to 12 schools, from our sense of the acting community and the research itself, not only are those fears unfounded, it's actually quite the opposite. There's lots of research pointing that the kids do better in grade 7 and 8 in that environment. I mentioned around behaviors and well-being measures appear to come up in the research and anecdotal evidence from other school boards, which we've captured. The fewer transitions really helps. And when they've looked at optimizing a transition into a high school from all the various models out there, grade 7 seems to be a magic number for that in terms of researchers, that those kids, when they enter in grade 7, have the highest completion rates at any other entry point. So we feel, and there's anecdotal evidence from other boards that pre and post, actually OSSLT scores have come up in 7 to 12 schools. We don't have the benefit of looking back at Aldershot and Burlington Central, but there's lots of, from a well-being and an outcomes measure, lots to suggest there's more in this than not. If we look at suspension rates, parent satisfaction ratings around safety, in our 7 to 12 schools, there's some of the highest ratings that we have. They're very high. They actually, Burlington Central and Aldershot, when we survey parents and kids, they actually report feeling safer than either of our elementary or secondary in Acton right now. So it's hard to convince people of that. It's kind of a show, don't tell community, but we're very confident we'll be able to show this over time. And we have every intent to monitor and track this. I'm not sure I hit on the last question, is the implementation. How's the school going to look?
Well, part of that will be answered by the integration committee, which will involve staff, students, parents, and board staff. So that's part of it, like the finer details on that, because you want to take advantage of the particular physical structure that you have. Having said that, the students in grade 7 and 8 are still in grade 7 and 8. They will have a grade 7 and 8 timetable, which will be different than the high school because of minutes in the day, that kind of thing. It can be scheduled if needed that they have different lunch times, and that would depend again on the integration committee, but that's something that can be done as well. They would still get to participate in board-wide grade 7-8 sports and all those kinds of activities. And even Michelle Lemaire, when she was up, they said they had a unique model for their dances. They did the 7-8 dances during the day, and then they did the high school dances at night. And the nice thing was that they could maximize decorations and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of advantages to it, and the whole worry about the young kids with the older students. That's not something that Michelle deals, Principal Lemaire, I should say, deals with much at all at the high school level. So it can be fixed so that it works well for them. But we do want to leave things to the integration committee because we want to maximize the talent of the people up there and the unique structure and that kind of thing.
Trustee Collard.
Thank you. Through you to the presenters. I was just wondering if you could please include the projections, the chart with the projections in the actual report. I understand that I can click the link and see it, but it's a lot easier if it's actually in the report. Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Reynolds.
Okay. I would just, through the chair, I'd just like to share some comments to my colleagues. First of all, I appreciated the opportunity to serve on the Acton BRC. As a trustee of 2 schools who currently are in a grade 7 to 12 configuration, and as a parent with some lived experience of students going to these schools, and also volunteering in grade 7 to 12 schools, I was invested in learning about the pressures impacting these schools and the concerns of the families themselves. I'd first like to comment on the process because I think it's really important for my colleagues to know that this BRC went beyond the scope of the process and delivered an extra step that was requested by the BRC members. These members all wanted to get an insider's look, a snapshot of what a school grades 7 to 12 looks like. And I know staff were concerned about overstepping their lines, and I appreciated that they allow this to happen. They were concerned that this might preempt the decision at the board table, or they wanted to respect the process, and they didn't want to preordain what this could look like. And I appreciate that. Certainly both the Central and Aldershot experiences are unique, and as pointed out by a number of Acton community members, these differences need to be honored. Thank you to Principal Lemaire for sharing the central experience and entertaining so many questions from the community. I'm grateful to the Boundary Review parent members, the community who attended the open house, those who sent their comments through the board web, and of course the community members who collectively responded to a parent-initiated public survey. Collectively, these comments and concerns confirmed in my mind that parents are really attached to their schools and invested in their children's education and well-being. It also confirmed in my mind that there's some adversity to change and apprehension of the unknown. And this is certainly a similarity shared by folks in Burlington before their children attend grades 7 and 8 at the high school. But the thing is, folks, these fears are quickly forgotten with the caring staff that plan intentional welcome and integration. I believe our staff already know these elementary students and they're committed to doing the same. And if this should be supported, I want to remind my fellow trustees, it's our job to hold the director to a high standard of care to ensure this caring approach to student integration continues.
Okay, Trustee Oliver.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to the superintendents. A parent had brought to our attention the concern, as apparently expressed by a student, about the school climate at the high school. Since we do collect information from students on a number of topics, including the school climate, what do these data sources tell us? Do these surveys identify any issues or concerns? And if so, what are we doing about them?
The data at Acton High, really across the board, I mean, one of the strengths of a small school, and Director Miller went through that when you were launching the PAR, is they know their kids, they can react to their kids, it's perhaps a very personalized experience. I would say that shows. There's no data points that flare as trouble points when you compare Acton High against our other schools. So while I can appreciate a student's singular experience may be troublesome, there's nothing in the data that shows that's multiplied out or that there's a culture issue at Acton High. It's actually, I've never walked in the building once without a student opening the door for me and saying, how do you do? Like, it's a very warm place when you walk in. I would say it permeates the halls. So I through our data or my experiences, I certainly haven't experienced that.
Director Miller.
Through you, Chair Drabens, to Trustee Oliver. It may be a small point, but I think it's a significant point. Last year, we gave out the first award of the Susan Milson Award to a student who demonstrated care for others, exemplary behavior towards others, support for others. And the first recipient was a student at Acton High School. So, sorry. So, I mean, one student doesn't make a school, but I think we have a great number of schools, and the first recipient was an Acton High School student. So.
Okay, Trustee Gray.
Thank you very much, and through the chair. Late last week, and I think it was already spoken about tonight by Trustee Reynolds, it came to the attention of myself, and then I shared it out to all the trustees and to the senior admin members and also the members of the BRC that a survey had been conducted, and 140 people had responded to the survey. It wasn't a survey that was organized by staff, but it was rather organized by the community. And the feedback coming back from that showed some discord with the option as presented. I believe 68% of the respondents disagreed or strongly disagreed with the current proposal. When I read that, I was intrigued to find out why they disagreed, and I looked at their criteria for disagreeing, and all of the criteria were in fact already identified in the report as presented tonight. The idea of the apprehension around the readiness, about kids being too young and impressionable, they wouldn't that this wouldn't fix the issues of students leaving Acton District High School, and that the plan seemed vague and lacked specifics. as I compared the two, the report that we have before us tonight and the concerns of the parents, I find there's a great connection. And yet in this report, as we care to understand, we know that a lot of these have been addressed either through the presentation tonight or through the frequently asked questions that were posted on the board's website. However, that being the case, it's a real feeling in the town. It's a real feeling among those people that responded to the point of 68% not being comfortable with this. And I would ask our group here tonight, how, if this was to go through, how would we address or overcome this feeling of being uncomfortable with this notion of 7 and 8s going to Acton High School?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Through the chair to Trustee Gray, I think the key in that is the work of the integration committee, which involves the community, staff, yourself, students. Certainly we can bring that together. And I think you gradually win them over through communicating, problem solving. We've had many boundary reviews that have gone through. All of them have contentious aspects to it or some worrisome aspects that would resonate in the community. And I think you win them over by showing them that you've heard, and you would address some of the concerns within the planning itself. And Trustee Reynolds mentioned that kind of made and act in approach, and I think that's what the integration committee will do. So they can start to work. If the vote goes through, we can start putting that community together and getting to work on that. And that's what I would just say. There's an element of trust in that, trusting us. But I think we've delivered as a board time and time again. And I think we'll deliver this time as well.
Thank you very much.
Director Miller.
Through your chair, Debents, to Trustee Gray, just to reinforce Superintendent Podrebaric's comments, as someone who was a principal in the Halton Hills area, I know those communities, although I was in Georgetown and not Acton, they will hold the board's feet to the fire around these things. Rightfully so. And I know that the staff at Acton High School and the staff at Mackenzie Smith Bennett will work very diligently to address the concerns of the community as they did in Burlington as well. But I think the first, most important part, or the first part of this, is honoring the concerns that parents have brought to us. And I know that the BRC and the BRSC certainly honors them. I know the Board of Trustees does, as does the senior staff. So I think in my experience from what I've seen with our staff, that would be step one, is honoring, and if you start to do that, then you start to work towards addressing their concerns. And I'm totally comfortable and confident that they will address these issues for the parents. It's easy for me to sit here and say that, and I was at the public meeting, and that was the concern parents were bringing to me, and we were saying that, and I invited them to join the integration committee, and I think some of them will avail themselves of that opportunity, which is great. So,
Trustee Shuttleworth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I think it might be to Trustee Gray or maybe Superintendent Podrebaric. So the 68% that was polled that said that they were anxious about the strongly disagreeing with the 7 to 12 configuration. Was that I'm assuming was prior to Principal Lemaire coming to speak to the group?
I believe it was after.
So.
No, actually, it was after the public meeting was sent out. So yes, it was before she came. But there's no, we don't have an indication of when people.
No, I think Superintendent Podrebaric, I believe it was the same night that Principal Lemaire was there, that those who were in attendance, of which I think there were about 35 people in attendance on that night, those that were in attendance were asked for their email addresses. Obviously, then it was fanned out beyond that, so that in fact, many of the people who would have responded to the survey, in fact, were not present for the presentation, nor perhaps even were aware of the website and all of the fulsome information contained therein.
So that's kind of my question. So you're talking about winning them over and trying to work with them. So if this happened prior to Principal Lemaire or after, what other steps can we take to get that buy-in? For like 68 is a big number, right? So I'm just wondering, what other steps are we looking at taking? I know you talked about the integration committee, but sort of do we have ideas as to what we're going to do to try to ensure that comfort gets reinstated?
Well, I would suggest it will be an ongoing carry forward item on every school council agenda in Acton moving forward. Constant updates through the community. The integration committee can always reach out. Like is from the outset, Acton's a small community. They can pivot, and I think they will pivot, but you've got to earn the trust on them and show them that what's been decided, what's being done in advance, how the transitions are being supported. And where I think we'll win them is when their kids show up, when they're welcomed, when they affiliate to the school. Happy kids usually lead to happy parents. And I think short of that and being really thorough and dotting every I and crossing every T along the process way, communicating the process, and then, having kids experience real success and warmth in welcoming and caring will win the day. That's going to be there at Acton High. They're a wonderful staff.
Director Miller?
Just, could I add to that? Just, we have right across the parking lot an excellent example of how to engage folks that are reticent to come to your building. You all remember what went on in Burlington and how strongly folks felt about the closing of Pearson and MMR. And I would say that's one of our board success stories there, and that's because of partly it was helped by lots of eyes on and lots of hands on, and we're still having integration meetings where we're still reporting about MMR till now. But some of the great lessons we learned there was the principal made sure that student voice was right up front when they looked at their structures within the school, their student government, their clubs, their teams. They really looked to make sure that there was great representation, and we can learn from a lot of the things that they've done. In fact, there's been a little handbook generated, so we've got experienced people in our board who've taken on these kind of challenges and really hit them out of the park. And I think we can use those folks to really help us with this transition as well.
Okay, and that's everybody on the speakers list. So thank you very much. We'll see you again March 4th. Can't believe it'll be March. Okay. So we have no information items for this evening. So we're going to go up to notices of motion. Hold on a second. Are there any notices of motion this evening? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, Vice Chair Harrison.
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe that there are two, if I'm not mistaken. One of them relates to a discussion around the leadership account that emerged at Committee of the Whole, and then the second one is with respect to a letter.
Okay, so the one about the leadership account is tied to the Committee of the Whole report that is at 573. So I propose we kind of deal with that this evening. So this has to do with we needed to seek some advice with regards to the near north ombudsman report to make sure that the recommendations that came out of their with regards to their program and accommodation review, some of the comments made by the ombudsman seem very pertinent to what our experience, and we want to make sure that we are always compliant and transparent. And so we engaged a lawyer to help us make sure that our documents, our bylaws, and associated governance policies have encompass some of those recommendations. We have, this was at Committee of the Whole last week, was it? Yes, well, the times are running together. And we are striking a committee to work on those, but we need to actually pay the lawyer. So the recommendation, I'd like to move that we discuss this further. Would anybody second me on this at all? Okay, Trustee Collard, thank you. So the recommendation is, be it resolved that the Halton District School Board authorize payment of expenses up to $3,000 from the board's leadership account related to consultation with legal counsel regarding bylaw and governance procedural changes arising from the Ombudsman report to the Near North District School Board with respect to program and accommodation review processes. So is there any debate on this at all? We kind of had a discussion at Committee of the Whole, so I'm not really expecting much. Okay, so we'll just, this needs to be paid, so, and the work's already done. Thank you. So all those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, and the other motion has to do with writing a letter to the minister. Would you like to speak to it, Trustee Gray?
Yes, thank you very much. As we continue to get letters circulated and shared among all the different boards in the province, it's come to our attention that many of the boards are now at a point where in response to what they're hearing, the trustees, in response to what they're hearing from their communities, that they are gathering a united voice within the Board of Trustees in different boards to send a letter to, and have been sending letters to the Honourable Stephen Lecce to express their concerns about the ongoing labour disputes and about the and about urging the minister to take all actions necessary to bring bargaining into a successful conclusion and ending the labour disputes as they exist today. The constant interruption to the education of students is very, very problematic, and the concerns of parents grow by the day. So I would like to see us direct our chair to write a letter to the Honourable Stephen Lecce outlining the views of the Board of Trustees here in Halton around the labour disputes and the importance of ending these disputes so that we can continue to invest in the future education of our students. And I think that that's something that should be done at the earliest opportunity. And I so move.
May I have a seconder? No, Trustee Reynolds. Thank you very much. Okay, so so the letter that you're speaking of includes an encouragement to come to a conclusion with regards to negotiations. I would also like to suggest that we, as our board is a board that is kind of the canary in the coal mine, with regards to the class size average, and the fact that, and we just learned this a few weeks ago, that the average is actually still moving to 28-1, and we will be over the 25-1 by September. even though that's what has been said in the media, I would suggest that we speak to that. And I would also like to invite the minister to come see what 24.85 looks like in action as well. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, so we have a speakers list, Chair. Vice Chair Al Harrison.
Sure. Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair, I'm in support of this. But I just want to point out that this is one in a series of letters that have been written since the education reforms were announced back in 2019. I don't believe we may have had one response or 0 responses. So one response. So it is a bit of a frustrating process. However, I do think that it's important, again, to re-express some of those comments. And the other thing that I think is important, perhaps we can mention, is just that all of the rhetoric at this point in time is serving to confuse and frustrate our communities, our taxpayers, our students. And it's not, I don't believe, serving the process of coming to a meaningful conclusion very well. And I'm sure that people generally know that, but it seems to be a really big driving force at this point in time, taking away from meaningful progress. So yeah, a letter, I think, a short and concise one, will let our community know that we are still on top of this, still supporting good, strong outcomes for kids and a return to stability in the education sector.
Okay, Trustee Collard.
Thank you. I have a couple of concerns. One, by asking for a conclusion, we're not, I think we need to make sure we use gentler language than that. Perhaps a respectful conclusion that respects our students and staff would be a better phrasing, because he could bring about legislation to conclude, and that wouldn't be entirely what we would be seeking. My second concern is that we have not suspended the rules to deal with this tonight.
This was motion was circulated beforehand, so there has been. Okay, you don't consider. Okay, we can definitely put a motion forward to suspend the rules. That's fine. Manager Gortmaker, is that possible? Could we?
Trying to work out the wording of it.
Don't worry, there is wording available. Could you add to the appliance a motion to suspend the rules? Thank you. This will just take a moment. So you're moving to suspend the rules? Seconded by Trustee Reynolds. Okay, is there any discussion on suspending the rules at all? Don't worry, the speakers list is still in the background. Nope. Okay, all those in favor of suspending the rules? Okay, and that carries unanimously. Okay, we're going to go back to our speakers list. Did you have anything? You're good right at this moment. Okay, thank you. Trustee Lau.
So on behalf of myself, Trustee Burns, and all of Student Senate, we stand behind this letter 100% because even a marginal increase in class sizes can mean reduced pathway choices for students, fewer caring adults to support students' mental health, and less meaningful face-to-face time with the teacher. And this will critically decrease the quality of our current world-class education system. Students need everyone at the table to truly treat this education system as an investment in the future of Ontario, and we need to see all parties at the bargaining table focus on the students who are feeling the impacts the most. Thank you.
That is an excellent statement, and I wonder if we should quote you on that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there are no more speakers on the speakers list. So we have a motion that's kind of been worked out on the Q&A, and I was wondering if we would be able to read that in and see if it matches the intent of what was sort of going on around the room. Okay, so what I have here, be it resolved that the chair write a letter on behalf of the, oops, somebody just moved my, be it resolved that the chair write a letter on behalf of the Board of Trustees to the Minister of Education to draw attention to the impacts and implications of announced education reforms on the Halton District School Board and ongoing anticipated pressures in the budgeting process for the 2020-2021 school year. The letter will also include a request that all parties refrain from using confusing and divisive rhetoric in the media, and movement of all parties back to the table in the hopes of focusing on a respectful process and positive outcomes for students that lead to investment in education to return the education sector to stability.
Through Chair Trevance, I appreciate the spirit of this letter. I'm just a little concerned around the all parties for the negotiation because the other party is OSSTF, ETFO, OECTA, and this letter is addressed to the Minister of Education. So I'm not sure how the Minister of Education could stop that, so to speak, I guess, or certainly control their own speaking points, but.
We can take out all parties. I have an editor working here. It's amazing Google Docs. Just things happen in front of me. It's coming, I promise. Yep, I think that works. Okay, the letter will, so the first part's fine. The letter will also include a request to refrain from using confusing and divisive rhetoric in the media and to return to the bargaining table in the hopes of focusing on a respectful process and positive outcomes for students that lead to investment in education and a return and to return the education sector to stability. So is everybody okay with this wording I'm going to take a unanimous consent thing, lots of nodding. Trustee Daniele, are you okay with changing it to that? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Okay, so is there any other talk on this? Okay, so we are going to vote on it. All those in favor? I'm not surprised to see a unanimous vote on that. Thank you very much. I will, of course, will be asking for your help in writing this letter. I never do these things alone. Okay, so we are now up to, I guess I should ask, are there any more notices of motion? Seeing none. Okay, we are up to the director's report.
Thank you, Chair Devens. I have three parts of the director's report tonight. Two of them are issues that the board has to be aware of vis-a-vis some of the labor challenges we're having. If the board will remember, and of course you remember, the grade 9 EQAO test was canceled in January. We are now at the point where schools are preparing for the OSSLT grade 10 literacy test. It is a sanction by OSSTF, and there's a great deal of preliminary work that needs to go on prior to the test, in addition to the supervision of the test. So I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Hunt Gibbons to talk a little bit about what's involved and the instructions that we have provided to administrators at secondary schools at this point.
Thank you, Director Miller. Through the chair to all of the trustees. So you can imagine that the Ontario Secondary School Literacy Test is a very large undertaking, and it requires a great deal of prep. It's not just about the day on which the students write. At the end of March, there's an awful lot of pre-work that goes into that and things that have to be done in and through EQAO. So at this time of year, normally in February, we are in schools adding and deleting the names of the writers, organizing the writing groups, that is by classroom or whether it's by large group as in a cafeteria or a library, ordering special versions of the test based on student accommodation needs, and there are 7 different e-versions of the test and at least 1 audio version of the test. And then entering all of the accommodations for all of the students who are entitled to those, and they're done individually to EQAO. This work is done by a whole group of people. It's very much a concerted effort, and so right now we don't have a whole bunch of people to do this, and so we are not moving forward with this work at this time. So it's simply not doable on the part of our administrators, and so the window closes today on that, and we have not completed this work. So we wanted you to be aware of that. I'm sure we're not the only group that hasn't done that. We will hear more as talks unfold and conversations occur, much like they did for mathematics. This is a much larger undertaking. Just to put it in perspective, our largest high school would have just over 600 kids writing this test at the end of March at schools as large as White Oaks. And so that amount of work on falling to administrators at this point, given everything else that they're currently doing, is just not doable. So at this point, we are waiting for further direction to see what happens.
And I can tell you that this is consistent with other public boards in the province right now. The instructions to our administrators is to, you cannot possibly do the work, so don't try to do the work. We don't know what the implications of that. The ministry is certainly aware of this, and a letter came from the Ontario Principals Council to the Deputy Minister and Minister with this same position. So, but it was important that we felt the trustees. Of course, you're all aware that the stakes are much higher for the OSSLT than they are for the grade 9 math test, because this is a requirement for graduation. And so there'll be some conversations around how that happens, and And there are various things that occur, like adjudication, et cetera, and so on. Perhaps Superintendent Hunt-Gibbons can talk about that. However, we don't know where we are yet. We're all kind of waiting for further, I don't know about direction is the right word, but commentary from the Ministry of Ed and or the Minister's Office. So if you wanted to say how students well, the different various ways that they get their literacy requirement.
So if in the case that a student had moved in, be it from another country or another province, and they had missed the writing of the test in their grade 10 year, and they had joined us in grade 12 and were unable or had missed the literacy test, there is an adjudication process. There's a process by which we put students either in a literacy course, but in order to take the literacy course in this province, you must have attempted the test once and been unsuccessful. And so we've taken the preventative step for any student who would be trying the test a subsequent time this year and actually enrolled them in the literacy test and bi-leveled that, or the literacy course and bi-leveled that with their English class. But when there are students who have never written it and they haven't been successful or unsuccessful, then we have to go through an adjudication process, and that is specific to putting together a portfolio of student work that is then determined to see whether or not it indeed passes the level of literacy and satisfies that requirement. And so we have collected information, and we are well aware of which students are in which schools that have not attempted this test in the past and are in their grade 12 year and on course to graduate, school by school, and those schools are aware and are talking and starting to put together these portfolios. So until there's further commentary and discussion as to what moves forward, at least we know that we are covering everyone's graduation requirement, because we do have these portfolios that would go forth to adjudication.
So we will keep the board abreast of further developments. And sometimes these things happen rapidly, so it may be a note from either Superintendent Hunt-Gibbons or myself to the trustees, because there's 2 weeks in between board meetings and we may not, something may happen in between, but we'll keep you up to date on what's going on. The last comment I would say about the literacy test is if it is postponed to a later date, we're not sure how that would play out as well, because currently it's struck work. And in the past, teachers will not do struck work after. So, but we don't know where that's going to go. And I'll just remind the trustees that with the grade 9 EQAO test, the ministry allowed boards to make local decisions around that. And I believe every public board in the province made the same decision to not run the grade 9 tests, for the very reasons that Superintendent Hunt-Gibbons has said. The second issue that you need to be made aware of is around extracurriculars and sports at the secondary level. It is not a sanction, and the teachers are still as our coaches and doing stuff, but there are some unique circumstances where an event cannot go forward due to strike days. So I will turn it over to Superintendent Hunt-Gibbons again to share more good news with you.
Thank you, Director Miller. So when we have our athletic events that are our local championships or even a regional GHAC championship, and if they happen to coincide with a provincial strike date or a rotating strike date, we have the control to change those dates, and they can be rescheduled. The issue comes up when we're talking about a provincial championship, an OFSA event, because if we have rotational strikes on an OFSA event, those days are not going to be rescheduled because there's no way to have them clear of this. And so we have had some examples of where this has happened. It hasn't impacted us because in the one that most recently we didn't have any students in that event, but other boards did, and students did not compete. When we're talking about high-risk sports, there's a coaching requirement that's different than a low-risk sport as well. So there's also a difference as to who could sub in for someone that was needed. And so just to make everyone aware here, we monitor it very carefully, and we're in touch with administrators and coaches to just trying to stay on top of all the various dates that are out there in the province to be aware of what's coming up and getting the information out to families and coaches and administrators.
Thank you, Superintendent Timmons. And I would publicly like to thank the local president of OSSTF, who has been in conversations with Superintendent Hunt Gibbons and myself and Executive Officer McFadden around this very thing. She is clearly understanding of the dilemma that this poses for some students. So I just want to thank President Gage. Now, the last item on my director's list really is good news. And so I'm going to turn to Superintendent Blackwell.
So through the chair, last week you may be aware that there was an event held on, I believe it was the Thursday the 13th. There were 3 schools, Burlington Central, Nelson, and Robert Bateman. Students came together and organized a dance at the Holiday Inn in Burlington. They were hoping to be able to provide that opportunity. They sold out. There were about 550 students that attended. Staff were there, and every administrator was there as well. Kids had a great time. You'll see it in one of the PAR updates, but I just wanted to let you know that that had happened, and it was a great experience for kids.
Thank you. So perhaps Superintendent Podraveric will organize a dance for Mackenzie Smith Bennett and Acton High School. Thank you. That's my director's report.
Okay. So next we're up to communications from the chair, and I just refer to the 2 letters that have been linked to our agenda. One has to do with vaping, which is from the Waterloo region, and it is an issue at all boards. So the letter is not unique. I'm sure the feelings, or what's expressed in the letter is not unique. And also York Region District School Board talk about mandatory online learning. Those are both great reads, and I encourage people watching to also take a read too. And now we're up to committee reports. We have 3 items listed. The SEAC report, the OPSPA Public Education Symposium report, which probably could have gone under trustee questions and comments. I don't know. It just outlined the agenda of the Public Education Symposium and some of the speakers. Okay. And was attended by many of the trustees around this table. So it was great to see. Are there any other, I see Trustee Collard.
Thank you, through you, to all trustees. The OPSPA, which is our provincial organization, is holding a Take Your MPP to School week. It's from the 14th to the 17th of April, and we are encouraged to contact our local MPPs, take them for lunch, and take them on tours of our schools. I've sent the email out to all trustees, and I would encourage us to participate fully in this to the extent that we are able.
Just a quick question. Should trustees, because I know for just looking at the Burlington trustee, Burlington MPP, there's 4 trustees that touch sort of through their wards. Should we coordinate through our grouping, our municipal grouping, or a riding kind of grouping so we're not bombarding the MPP over and over and over and over again?
Yes, I would suggest that we do coordinate. I, for instance, have 2 MPPs. So do you, I believe. So yeah, I think coordinating to make sure that we're not having lunch every single day of the week would be a good thing. Perhaps doing a group lunch would be a good idea.
Okay. Trustee Arosha.
So committee report. Last night, the Parent Involvement Committee hosted a PIC information session. Trustee Gray and I were in attendance along with parents across Halton. First on the agenda were Superintendent Rob Etoff and Assistant Principal Mary Marshall, who presented the HDSB Student Census Initiative. It was an engaging discussion and parents had varying opinions. There was an opportunity to seek feedback from the group, namely on why families may be reluctant to participate in the census, what are the best ways for the HDSB to share materials and information, as well as an understanding about the census, and how PIC and school councils can support the implementation of the student census. Next up was Leslie Mansfield of the HLF, who gave parents an overview on how HLF helps our students. I think some were in shock to learn that Halton has a 10% poverty rate, with Oakville at 12%. I think by the end, many felt inspired to consider donating some of their school fundraising money to HLF. Overall, parents appreciated learning about what is happening at the board and expressed interest in future topics. And the next PIC meeting is scheduled for sometime in May.
Thank you very much for that update. There are no more speakers on the speakers list. Okay, there is another speaker on the speakers list, Trustee Amos.
I'd just like to remind trustees, I believe everyone got an invitation to the Halton Learning Foundation annual general meeting, which is on Thursday, tomorrow at 6 o'clock at Oakville Trafalgar High School.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, we are now, did you have? Okay, Director Miller.
Thank you, Chair Drabentz. I forgot one thing, and I think it's important. I don't know why I forgot it, but Vice President Stupple of ETFO is in the room, and I want to acknowledge that both our unions and our Human Resources Department, we're in challenging times, as everybody knows. We are having lots of labor actions, and there are tensions, and we've talked about the relationships. I want to applaud both the union leadership in this board and our HR department for frequently problem solving and sorting out issues that arise professionally and respectfully of each other's positions, and an acknowledgement of where everybody is. I did acknowledge President Gage of OSSTF earlier around the extracurriculars, sports in particular for secondary, but we're having that experience with all our union partners in this. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that sometimes we hear rhetoric in the TV and it's like everybody's got their fists up. That's not happening in this board. Although there'll come a time. No, I'm only kidding. Thank you.
Okay, so now we are up to trustee questions and comments. Trustee Gray.
Thank you very much. I would like to just make mention tonight of a very special award that was given out recently. It's the Ontario Junior Citizen of the Year, and it was given to a young man by the name of Spencer Lippa, who every Friday performs a climate strike outside of Ethel Gardner Public School, sits the entire day in the park by himself on his own personal mission. I guess he's our own Greta, if you would. He has been named the Ontario Junior Citizen of the Year for promoting civic action and democratic participation, and he is presented at 3 of the Halton Hills Climate Action workshops. I think, too, it should be noted that he's the youngest member of the Ontario Green Party, and that his nomination for this award was supported by Mike Schreiner and Elizabeth May. So congratulations to this young man who is setting a fine example up in the hills.
Okay, that's wonderful. Trustee Amos.
Thank you. I just wanted to share, I'm very proud of some of our schools today. They got involved in the very first I Read Canadian Day, and what it is an initiative by one Canadian author in particular, but a number of them have got on board to try and encourage Canadian children to read more Canadian books. So a number of our schools did get involved in across Halton, and I'd just like to commend all of them and encourage more of our schools to maybe get involved next time, because we have some amazing authors and we need to do more promotion for our own country.
Okay, great. And Trustee Gray, you're back on the list.
Yes, thank you. On an entirely different note, last week I shared a letter that I received from a parent in Halton Hills who made an inquiry of not just the schools in Halton Hills, but of all schools in Halton, and maybe of the policies that we have around the charging of mandatory fees for things like equipment or different experiences. And I received lots of input from different trustees that this is a topic worthwhile for us to have a discussion, a formal discussion of some sort at a later time. And I just wondered if Director Miller would like to just state something for the record at this time.
Through you, Chair of Events, to Trustee Gray, I too received the email. And there's lots of stuff in it around fees and so on. I would categorically say right now there should be no mandatory fees in our schools. But however, having said that, under the direction of Associate Director Bogue, he has met with all the family school superintendents who are currently researching the situation in each of their schools, and we will be coming to Associate Director Bogue, myself, and perhaps some of the superintendents will be coming to Committee of the Whole on March 11th to provide trustees with information and have a discussion at that time.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I see no more speakers on the speakers list. We have exhausted our agenda, and I declare this meeting adjourned.